Leibniz would not. And Pasnow suggests, for example, that computers might count as cognitive for Aquinas and bees might not. And Aquinas clearly denies cognition to plants. Leibniz says they're monads perceiving in all living things. Still, what we've said about Aquinas' theory of cognition serves to distinguish what goes on in a monad from the apparatus of goal-directed activity he ascribes to non-cognitive substances such as fire. And I think this divide deepens when Aquinas addresses the connection between appetite and cognition. We looked at the argument from form to inclination as it applies to non-cognizant beings. The natural inclinations or appetites which form determines in non-cognizant beings contrast with the appetites that follow form when form is present in cognitive beings. Number 16, this is the continuation of a passage that I read earlier, or it's on the handout. Therefore, as forms exist in those things that have knowledge in a higher manner and above the manner of natural forms, so must there be in them an inclination surpassing the natural inclination, which is called natural appetite. And this superior inclination belongs to the appetitive power of the soul, through which the animal is able to desire what it apprehends, and not only that to which it is inclined by its nature. So the appetitive faculty distinctive of cognizant beings is a multiform appetite, which can be directed to any one of the many things that such a being apprehends. The appetite of fire is just fixed and for a small number of things. Monads can surely be credited with multiform appetition, since they exercise their power of acting on everything they perceive, albeit confusedly. Two quotes to this effect. Number 17, with confused perception and corresponding appetite, which with some you might term instinct, the soul imitates divine infinity in such a way that nothing happens in the body that the soul does not in fact perceive, nothing concerning which the soul does not exercise its appetite, even if we are unaware. And again, there are no perceptions which are matters of complete indifference to us. None. So although Carriaro is right that a unity constituted by goal-oriented activity need not be cognitive in the Thomistic metaphysics, the end-directed activity of a monad involves complex representations and multi-directed appetition of the sort distinctive of cognizant beings, according to Aquinas. Most important, cognition of and appetites for particular ends cause the actions of animals. In this way, animal agency is explanatorily, conceptually linked with cognition and multiform appetite. With a few key adjustments, I say a few, Aquinas' theory might be adapted to explain the cognition between perception, appetition, and acting in a monad. But although this way of explaining monadic acts may be attractive for Leibniz, there are commentators who argue that he cannot consistently maintain a key principle of this scheme, that appetites in general are akin to desires. The problem is illustrated by Bale's dog. The animal is eating a bone when a man sneaks up behind and gives it a blow on the back with a stick. Leibniz is committed to saying that the soul of the dog goes from feeling pleasure to pain, and the cause of the transition comes from within the soul. But the only causes of change in the soul are its appetites, and the dog surely has no appetite for pain. How can Leibniz explain what happens in the soul of the poor dog? Well, to solve the problem, some commentators urge he must distinguish between two sorts of appetites. First, those directed to a represented future good for which the soul has something akin to desire, and second, appetites directed to ends which are good but not represented as good or not desired by the soul in any case. This follows the distinction between two kinds of final causes that I introduced earlier. So on this explanation of what happens in the soul of the dog, just prior to being struck, the dog's soul has a desire-like appetite for future perceptions of its jaws clamping repeatedly on the bone. But at the same time, it has appetites for perceiving future events, such as motion of bodies in conformity with universal laws, laws of mechanism, and the future states of a world in which are maximally good given its present state. And the dog has nothing akin to desire for these future states. Its perceptions either, and I'm not sure how Don thinks of this, either don't represent them at all or don't represent them as good. The dog's desire for future bone gnawing and its non-desiderative appetites engage in a contest of strength, which determines the transition the soul undergoes. In the event, the non-desiderative appetites prevail. And I say here that Don works out an elegant account of the difference between a monad's actions and passions along these lines, and Bob Adams briefly endorses this sort of solution to the problem of the dog. So I've got an uphill climb here. Yet I think this solution to the Bales dog problem has disadvantages. If some acts of a monad realize ends desired by the monad and others don't, then the acts explained by desire-like final causes are a proper subset of monadic acts. There is then no univocal sense of final cause in which it's true that the realm of monads is governed by laws of final cause and the realm of bodies is not completely governed. Moreover, adhering to this solution implies that the explanatory scheme we have on the table, which has precedent in Aristotle and Aquinas, does not apply to the operations of monads. That is, the theory of Aristotle and Aquinas is to the effect that cognition explains appetites for many different things, and the multiplicity of appetites explains what a thing does. The proposed account of what happens in Bales' dog goes very differently. The soul contains non-desiderative appetites for ends whose connection with perceptions is, I may get information about this. As far as I can see, it's so far not explained, except taken as a primitive fact about the nature of the monad. And the soul's transition to pain is the result of a contest between its desiderative and non-desiderative appetites. So we lose this explanatory theory of what's happened. But I do think that the problem of Bales' dog might be solved without invoking non-desiderative appetitions. The crucial point is that a monad achieves an end only if it has the means of doing so, and souls act through appetition, ends, and means. The soul's means of realizing a given appetite are the other appetites it has at the same time. Plainly enough, the dog's present desire for future perception of its jaws sinking again into the bone will be realized only if a great many bodies move in appropriate ways, the parts of its jaw, the parts of its body, the parts with which its jaws communicate, their parts, and so on. The soul's means for attaining perceptions of the requisite motions consist of its appetites for perceiving them. Leibniz explains what is required for an appetite of the soul to be executed by the body. It's necessary that the appetites and consequently the perceptions from which they arise attain in perfect detail everything which brings this about in the organs. For this reason, quote, will is not always sufficient to make the body act according to its desire when the exact perception of the means is not conjoined with it. Thus, it's necessary that the end and mean should always be joined together in the soul as causes and effects are in the body, in order that the desired effect should be executed. Or, as Leibniz puts it, only if a distinct appetite of the soul is seconded by its confused appetites is the body obliged to do what the distinct appetite demands. Otherwise, the confused appetites will have some success, and means for success of the distinct appetite will not be fully realized. So no appetite is directly opposed to another, just directed to a different object. Every appetite attains as much as it can, given the others. So actually I'm going to quote the passage here that Don did. It's true that an appetite cannot always completely reach the whole perception toward which it tends, but it always obtains something. It always gets somewhere. And I think that this apparatus is adequate to explain why the soul of the dog contains the cause of its transition from pleasure to pain. Monads often do things for which they have nothing akin to desire, but what they do is always the result of the many desire-like urges they have. It is clear that Leibniz does think there are urges to do things which are not responsive to sense perceptions and are not conscious, but they nevertheless are urges, and he says they are like desires. If they were strong enough, they would be desires. They fail to be desires simply because they're weak and we're not aware of them. But they are urges, desire-like. And I might mention here that regular law-governed change is harmonious, and the perception of harmony is pleasing, according to Leibniz. And in view of this, it's not implausible that the dog has some attraction to perceiving future changes in the motion of the parts of its body and surrounding bodies that are regular with respect to previous changes it has perceived. It's doing all of this confusedly. It doesn't realize that this is going to add up to something that's painful, but just these individual changes have some attraction to the dog because they are harmonious, they're regular, they're law-governed. The laws that govern them are the best possible worlds for laws for governing transition in material things. So my point is that Bayles' dog doesn't force us to abandon the explanatory theory that connects cognition, appetition, and the acts of agents. So this brings me to the transtemporal unity of a monad and the unity among its many acts. An explanatory theory of the Aristotelian Thomistic variety points to an account of unity suggested by Carriaro, that all powers, tendencies, and acts of the same agent contribute to a goal-directed activity. To be sure, a multiplicity of acts directed toward diverse particular ends, all tending to implement a general good and doing so more or less well. Now, Jonathan Bennett notes that fundamentally, corresponding to every monad, there is only a law that specifies and that